So I want to get it far enough back that we can see both of us, and I'm probably just going to be looking mute the whole time, so we can edit it.
All right.
All right, so what's really difficult and what really the focus is for my friend Paul Sherlock and I is community involvement and community engagement and doing that in like a meaningful, genuine, realistic, long-term way.
Yes.
Because the driving force is it's really good for people who volunteer to volunteer, and it's really good for people who need help to get help, and then our whole society is kind of healthier.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's a starting point. Yes. I think, you know, as we go on in life, it's becoming more and more necessary for us to be involved. You know, our civic duty should not end at the ballot box. It should be, you know, what can I do around the community besides complain about the things we don't like?
Yeah.
Well, you know, we have limited resources to address them, as we increasingly find out. And so that means if we want to make a change, then we have to get involved.
Right. So how did you become involved in the many programs that you're involved in? I'm presuming you didn't just wake up one day and find yourself heavily involved many hours a week with 5 organizations.
Well, you know, there's been a certain bent toward me giving back in general. You know, I was a big brother for a long time. And you know, after my wife Donna died, I just got a little bit more, you know, increasingly got more active in things as far as community oriented projects and what have you. And then in 2005, I got involved with the homeless as a result of the homeless stand down. And that experience, I just did that for the one day that they had the event, but it left an impression upon me. And so that led me to reach out to eventually to Care Alliance, a friend over there, Donna, at Care Alliance, and she put me in touch with Jim Schlecht. And then from there, I just increasingly got more involved with the homeless. Jim had set me up over at Malachi for their clothing program, which I did for a year. I went back to him after that and said, I want to be more involved, and ended up going with him on Outreach.
That's a dangerous sentence to say to Jim Schlecht. He has ideas about how to involve people.
I'm well aware.
That's how I met you.
Exactly. I'm well aware of that. Yes, but yeah, I said I wanted to be more involved, and so we started going on Outreach together. I was a sort of a had peripheral involvement in the formation of Metanoia. I went to some of the meetings talking about setting this up, but I really didn't get involved with that too deeply at the time. This is in the late 2000s. But then after having done the outreach with Jim for 6 or so years, I started, I went back and said, I want to get more involved, and, you know, thought I'd want to be on the board at Metanoia. And so in 2012, they invited me to be on the board, and which I was for 7 years, 4.5, and then just continue with Metanoia.
Yeah. And working with the same population and doing a lot of the same kind of outreach with Radical Hospitality now.
Yeah, Radical Hospitality is definitely a very close derivative of Metanoia.
So can you talk some about how Metanoia and Radical Hospitality differ from other shelter-based homeless programs?
Sure. Most of the established homeless programs in the community are, I mean, they're large in scale. 2100, which is the men's shelter run by Lutheran Metropolitan Ministry, can house, well, with the addition, I think there are probably over 400 people that could be in that shelter. Norma Herr, they're undergoing a renovation, but when they, in their previous building, they were, I think, able to house 120 people, yet they ended up averaging close to 200 people because the need was there, and so they, even though they had capacity for 120, they,
So that means capacity for 120 is 120 bunk beds.
Right.
And or 160 bunk beds, right, up and down, and then over capacity means where cots or mats on the floor,
sleeping
mats
on the floor.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if they had beds, bunk beds. It's a women's shelter. I wasn't making my way through the shelter, but I do remember in the few times that I was over there that they had mats in the basement. Not really.
That's my homeless plan, is I'm sleeping in the basement because Gene lets us watch cable if everyone's really good.
Okay. Good to know that.
Yeah, you got to have a bailout plan.
Right. So the shelter system, the organized shelter system that gets the most of the funding from the government, county government,
emergency shelter grants,
is larger in scale.
Yeah.
It's more impersonal.
It's institutional. It feels institutional. And the men's shelter, the largest men's shelter, Lutheran Metropolitan Ministry, has a group shower.
Right.
And many people do not shower there. So there's other places in our collaborative where you can come and shower.
Right.
And there's another big player, City Mission, has a men's location and then a women's and family location at Laura's home.
Right. Laura's home is a little bit different than, what they have at 55th, and they're, who they have at both locations is much smaller in scale.
Yeah.
And so going back to the main shelter systems, it's not a knock on them because, they are providing harm reduction for people.
Yeah, they're saving lives every night to the tune of hundreds of people.
So I applaud that. I will never denigrate them for that. But when it comes to people that are out on the street, okay, so there are many categories of homelessness, but we'll talk two principal ones. People that will go to those shelters because they want to be in a conditioned space, and people that refuse to go for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
The simple one that I think is easily identifiable for people that are not understanding of why wouldn't people go to shelters is if you're a couple, if it's a man and a woman and they're a couple, they can't stay together at night.
Unless they are legally married and a cisgender straight couple other than that.
Well, that I'm not even aware of. And
they have room and have kids over the age of 12. Like there's all these things around double parent families.
But, I'm sure in your walk, you recognize that a lot of people just are a couple, not married, not anything. And they just, they're together and now they have to separate at night in order to get shelter. And a lot of people don't want to do that. Then you add in other factors like, what if they have service animals? What if they, they may not want to go because of the crime associated with these shelters, the violence associated with the shelters, having things stolen.
Not wanting to abandon their belongings, not having money
Right.
to keep things in storage, because some of the shelters will count your items when you come in and say you can have 27 items. Right. So like your birth certificate,
Right.
your state ID, like the things that you carry with you, your dogs,
Right.
your pets,
Right.
your box of baby books that you've had. I've seen some really I've had to throw away some really sad things that were abandoned at large scale shelters.
Right. So, there's a lot of factors in why people won't go to the main shelters. And why will they come to Radical Hospitality, Metanoia, or Denison UCC? It's because we remove those barriers. So couples can come and sleep together. Obviously we're in a congregate setting. They're not sleeping in any intimate way, but they can have beds right next to one another. Service animals can be brought in. We have a higher staff ratio than the main shelters, which at minimum allows for less outbreaks of violence or criminality, theft, what have you. We don't check book bags. We don't wand people. These are other barriers. So
you don't make people fingerprint scan in.
No, I think sometimes when we are now with the central reporting agency, I don't know I can't think of
HMIS.
I don't know if they do fingerprint or if we just record them, but but regardless, we're just not in people's business as the main shelters. And so people find it more appealing to come and stay with us. And between the 3 shelters last year, we were bringing in more than 100 people a night. So in spite of the main shelters being, 80-90% capacity, there's still over 100 people that are looking for alternatives to that.
Yeah.
So, so it's a reason for providing overnight hospitality. And I think one of the main differences is because we do have the higher staff ratio to our guests, which ties into our main mission, which is to build relationships with our guests, with the people that come through our doors, so that when they're ready to make changes in their lives, they know that they have people that will support them, that they will be resources for them in helping them navigate the system to get to wherever they want to be, whether it's permanent housing, whether it's treatment, whether it's finding a job. So we really emphasize relationships with people, and these are all attractions for folks.
Yeah. I worked largely in formal shelter systems. I kind of came to it in Northern Kentucky on accident. I was a special education major. I started working 3rd shift at a family shelter, thinking I was going to be making PB&Js for people who happened to wake up. I did not anticipate what made people homeless, or to just see, we would do like a 5-page, it was a pink sheet. If you want people to do all the pages in a packet, you have to make them different. We had a pink sheet, a blue sheet, and a yellow sheet, and you had to do them all. And the pink sheet, I think, had like the last 5 addresses you had and how many kids you have. And I remember asking a woman, this is like 8:30 at night, and she's got 2 kids asleep on her, and she's sitting in my tiny office, and we're just like, let me do this so I can assign a bed. And I said, how many children do you have? And she goes, 3, 2. And what had happened was a young child death that absolutely decimated her life, and she couldn't live where she was living anymore, and she had nowhere to go. when the Housing First trainings were going on, they talked about this data that we collect. Everyone who comes in, we write down, their name and date of birth and put them in HMIS and assign them a number. And then if they go to another shelter somewhere else or do street outreach somewhere else, they can track how many unique homeless people there are. And what they found is the average length of stay, the most common, there's like mean, median, and mode is the most common occurring number. Most common is 1 night. People just need a night of respite, of safety, of shelter from the elements, right? But there are many other people who have higher barriers and they need less than 30 days usually. These are working people who have had a cacophony of things happen, often overlapping with a lack of support. And then there are people who have not landed here on a victory lap, and like they could not make it through an interview with me in that tiny shelter. And I started working in SAMI programs because I couldn't get any of my ladies who couldn't get work because they were mentally ill and had an addiction. I couldn't get them into addiction until they were stable on meds. And I couldn't get them on meds until they were sober. No one would take any of them. And SAMI services were a baby program. And so I went across the river to Cincinnati and started working there, and then worked in a kind of a similar program up here in Cleveland. But I had been at Frontline that had managed the shelters. And I kind of have a reputation of, I really just am good at working with people who are in very acute states in their lives. It's not overwhelming to me as a provider. And so this program, Bridges to Housing, was started, and they wanted to target the people who move into apartments, into these permanent supportive housing units, rent controlled. They give you furniture, they give you your utensils and a towel and a pillow and sheets, like you have everything. And they were like getting evicted their first month in. And they looked at the commonality, and it was chronically homeless people who had the longest stays, right? So working for more than 10 years in the field, I thought this was going to be 50-year-old Black men with schizophrenia, maybe with a crack addiction, right? And I was like, oh yeah, street outreach, I can do this. There's, people are everywhere in this world, whether they're in their home or outside. And we went through the training program. How are we going to do this? And they said, just go see Jim. He does birth certificates on Tuesday. Just go like you're going to get a birth certificate. Like that was the formal training, was to go along with Jim, because it's really so, it's such an investment of time and patience and vulnerability as a worker to build trust with people who have been let down over and over and over again. So one of the first people that I was able to engage with identified longest stayer, and he says, I'm not going unless you get my buddy housing. I say, well, your guy's not on my list, but let's get him on the list. What's his name? And he introduces me to him, and these two guys are living in a house where there's half of the house has no roof in this neighborhood, and they have a kitchen stove that they've pulled away from the wall, and they have in the middle of the kitchen, and they just have fires in it in this abandoned house. And the guy's brother is taking his social security check, and like he's not even on the radar. And we had moved both of them into the same building. They both moved, and one of them died in his sleep. And I was so devastated. I was like, no, this just happened, And my friend Jim Schleck said, wow, like what dignity that we were able to give this person this life, And then we had the funeral. And people who knew him, who were in Parmadale Orphanage with him as a child, came.
Wow.
So people, and he had been living, before teaming up with this guy, he had been living in truck beds for like 25 years. Just going to places that were trucking and breaking into the truck cabs and just sleeping place to place to place. So there are people who were not in HMIS. No one's writing down their name. No one knows they exist, right? And in Cleveland, we've had this huge Catholic social worker movement of people who have been doing this for 30 and 40 years, and social justice people, right, who are the other people that you think have made a difference in this region that we don't have what's happening in Portland, San Francisco, LA with the outside population?
You mean as individuals?
As individuals, as a collaborative, yeah.
Well, I would say, you've got Dennis Ashton and Gene Kosmak. These are two folks that do outreach along with Jim, as you previously mentioned, meeting people on the street and meeting people where they're at, which is a key component of this. It's not to try to determine what's best for somebody. It's just showing up as a friend. If you talked about, being vulnerable and being, involved with people, and, to a certain extent, if you want to be a friend, that's what you have to do. You have to just be involved. You can, emotionally detach from their circumstance, but you still have to demonstrate to people that you care for them. And that obviously should be an honest emotion, but where that comes from is just, as I say, not having expectations about what they should be doing with their life versus what they are doing. So just going to campsites and, providing water, food, clothing, what have you, but mostly using those as vehicles to sit and talk with people and just get to know them, so that you can build that trust, so that, that is the starting point now for them to, want to do different things in their lives. I mean, as I know you're well aware of, we talk about people that, what is the main reason people are homeless? And I would venture to say that it's because people have unresolved trauma in their life.
Yeah. Number one factor when we look at HMIS data, which is people that we count and we know about, number one factor is having been in foster care as a child.
Mm-hmm. So
it's what most people have in common. It's not addiction. It's not mental illness. Right. It's not violence. It's not a personality disorder. It's having been in foster care.
Well, I would say the addiction, the mental health is a symptom, is an outcome of the main reason why people are making the decisions that they're making. And, I've just heard horror stories from people of, what they've had to endure in their life. And, I'm not a counselor, a formal counselor, but I can be a friend. And that's the approach as you talk about who are the people doing this work. And there's many people besides the people that are just going on the front lines and visiting people at campsites that are doing this. And the commonality is understanding or learning to understand where people are coming from in their lives. Again, what is making them make decisions that go against their basic needs in life, and as I say, just show up. I mean, there's so many times where you just can't possibly measure the effect that you're having on people, because it takes years before a change occurs in their life. I think of many people that I've walked with in that way, where it's I think of Dave, and it took him 5 years to go from living in a tent across from major hooples to being in housing over in the Detroit Shoreway neighborhood, which has stuck for him, but it took a long time to get there. And as I said, it's not rocket science. It's not rocket
hours.
science.
I'll tell you, I have all the pedigrees and all the most formal trainings in family trauma therapy, young child trauma therapy, critical time intervention. I've worked the evidence-based practices, and they all come down to when you are in the most severe time of your life, you need to see someone many times a week.
Right.
And you need to give yourself flexibility on your schedule so that you can anticipate when something happens, everything else falls off for the day, and this is where I am.
Right.
And I'll sit with you in a very regulated space as the person who is okay,
Right.
and be with you even if you are not okay,
Right.
and help you sit with this until the storm passes.
Right.
That's like every evidence-based practice is just researchers following non-clinicians around and saying, how come this works when it doesn't work the other way?
Right. Well, I mean, I think when people are in either crisis or, have been subjected to severe trauma that kind of leaves them paralyzed, even if it's just partially. I think what the best thing to do is just sit and listen. You don't need to offer advice. You don't need to say, well, if you do this, then this will happen. It's just to listen. I mean, I think of this as akin to people grieving. What possibly can you say to someone that will alleviate their grief? I don't know of anything effective, but a hug and just listening to what the person has to get out. I think that's what we can do best, and anybody can do it. And I feel like that's what's most effective.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're grieving and when you're struggling with trauma, having a way to put a voice to what you're experiencing is part of the healing for that person, for any of us, as we go through, these kind of incidents that come up in our lives.
Yeah. I just went to a funeral for a very close person to me last April, and it was months and months before it just occurred to me, like, I don't remember that day at all, and I'm not too distressed about it. Like, I know why I was not storing memories on that day. I was
Right.
very upset, and I thought it had to have been at St. Patrick's Church. I can't think of where else we would have, but I don't have a memory of it. And then I remembered my cousin Courtney sat with me.
Right.
And I don't remember anything that was said. I don't remember the songs that were sung, but I remember she was with me.
Right.
And that's so spectacular. And now we're almost up on the year anniversary. I'm starting to go, oh, I remember this person from the calling hours.
Right.
Oh, it was so nice to see that person. And it was nothing that they said.
Right.
It was the thoughtfulness and the care that they took time to come and be with us
Showing
in
up.
that moment.
Yeah, showing up. That's so much of the battle is just showing up, and people know that, people recognize that, and they respond to it.
Yeah.
And as I said a moment ago, they might not respond right away. You talked about a year before you started realizing your memories. I mentioned, some of the folks like Dave that have taken years for a change to occur in their lives. And, if we were outcome-based approach, Dave would be an afterthought. He'd probably still be in a tent somewhere. But because we, weren't measuring success, we just kept showing up week after week after week. So, this is why, we started this about community involvement, and this is why I feel like it's so important for people to understand that I feel this is part of our community responsibility to be there for one another. Obviously we have big communities, we're closer and to some and not as close to others. But I feel like we have a responsibility to one another to be support when things get difficult. And I feel like the people that are on the street are every bit as much a part of our community as a person that has an address.
Yeah.
So,
can you imagine if you were like a veterinarian who treated elephants and you were an expert in elephants and the zoo called you and you were like, oh, I only work with wild elephants. I really don't know how they are in captive. Well, it's the same being.
Right.
You know, it's the same systems, it's the same people.
Right.
So yeah, everyone is an equal member and an equal citizen in our community, but that task of building citizenship, the change of metanoia, you know, transforming, putting on the mind of another and transforming the way that you are thinking. I feel like the mission statement of the programming is very much around the helpers and the volunteers, like change your thinking and change your understanding of what you're doing with this. I actually came to metanoia after I had a patient die. I had a patient die who was the same age as my youngest daughter. And I've lost patients over the years. This one was so young. Child coffins are always excruciating. And this was a baby who was the same size as mine. So when I would take mom and kids places, I didn't have to adjust the straps, you know. And mom was charged. And I felt very clearly it was unjust. And mom is done prison time for the death of her child. And I was really just struggling with, what am I doing in this field? Like, I feel like I am just a cog in the machine that's keeping capitalism running here. I don't feel like I'm affecting change. I have a lot of pressure for my individuals to be out of the shelter in 30 or 90 days and families to be out in 120 days. And there's all this data stating why that's ludicrous, you know, and like, these are things I don't really understand. So I had gone to, I feel like it was maybe a baptism or something. It was like not a regular church service. And I ran into Jim. And I said, how do you keep doing this? You know, and how do I know? Because I don't feel like the answer is to look away. I don't feel like the answer is to go and work in chemical engineering, which is what I was going to do instead of social work.
Right.
Because these problems are still going to exist and the system is still going to exist. So how do you keep your well filled? You know, how do you stay full as a vessel so that you can be abundant and spill over in your abundance to others? And he said, I have a thing that I want you to do with me. And I joined the board at Metanoia, you know, and one of the first things in social work ethics, the first statement, they talk about pro bono work. So I was making $14 an hour for the majority of my career when I was getting paid really well. My first job, I made $7.12 an hour, you know. My first year of work, I made under $20,000 a year in 2000. You know, this was not the 1960s or 70s. And I was like, pro bono, what are you talking about?
Right.
However, the pro bono work is so essential because in order to have the energy and the abundance to do that, I have to do a lot of caretaking of myself and management of like what I'm worried about at work. And my new phrase at work became, well, just write me up about it. Like if you need to do that and you need to write me up, we can do that. I get like 3 dings a year. I've been here 10 years. I haven't gotten one. Let's go.
Right.
You know, like those aren't things I'm going to worry about anymore. What I'm going to worry about is whether or not my patients trust me and whether or not my patients feel, and I've heard this one, when I say, I wish I had known this was happening. I'm so glad I know now. I wish I knew it was happening. And they said, I was afraid you were going to go back to the office and make fun of me with your coworkers because I know how office people talk. And I said, that's real. There are office people who say really terrible things, you know, and like poke fun at their patients. And people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but they will never forget the way that you made them feel. And once I turned my attitude towards that, the work became much easier. And then I had more of myself to give and in things that are actually very energizing.
Right.
The board work that we did during the time of metanoia was no cakewalk, right? But I learned more about managing a business than I've learned anywhere else in my life.
Right.
You know, I've learned more about nonprofit status and tax forms and payroll taxes that I would never have learned another way.
Right.
So you have a career. You have things that you do for dollars, right?
Right.
Are you in building trades? Are you an independent contractor?
I own rental property, and I have developed. I did a project in Columbus, developed a project there, and so my rental property is what puts food on the table. I feel like I've been blessed in my life, fortunate. I mean, I had my major bumps and bruises. I lost my wife and such, but I feel like overall that, I've been blessed. And so doing this kind of work is my way of giving back. This is everything I've done in regards to the homeless and these other projects that I've been involved with has been on a volunteer basis. I've not taken a dime for what I do. And you talk about how you come to be where you can be present to people, and, how you've changed your mind. I think it's important for, people that might be listening to what we're saying, that for me, what keeps me coming back, and I tell this a lot, is I do it for very selfish reasons. And what that means is I do it for the lessons that my experiences teach me. I remember reading in the biography of the Dalai Lama how, people who are Buddhists recognize that their acts of empathy and compassion are self-serving. And, I've taken that idea and said, yeah, it's self-serving to me as well, but in this way of, gaining something that makes my life easier as a result of having that experience. And a specific example that I like to bring up is when Jim and I were at a campsite, this is going back many, many years ago, two gentlemen there, first thing in the morning. The one gentleman had 2 cigarettes to his name, and the other person had none. And the other person asked his friend if he could have a cigarette, and without thinking, that person gave him one of his 2 remaining cigarettes. It has obviously stuck with me because I think I wouldn't have done that. I would have been like, I've got my 2 cigarettes, you've got none. So a lesson in how to, be more unconditional. So I think when we, are deciding, can I do this? Can I be there for people who are living a difficult life and such, and not get emotionally charged? That this is one way of looking at what you're doing as a reason to keep showing up. Yes, sometimes you get emotionally attached, even though, I've learned to step back in most cases and be empathetic without being involved. But sometimes it does happen. But, again, coming back to the idea of what is this teaching me about my life that I could be doing differently is a powerful motivator.
Yeah, I think of a woman, I offered her 6 different apartments over the course of about 10 years in different residential programs and shelter spaces. And she just said, who's going to feed my cats? That's what her entire purpose was caregiving for these creatures that everyone else had forgotten. And she had a route that she would visit, and that was non-negotiable. She said, if you can figure out a way for me to keep all my cats, that's it for me.
Right.
You know, and I love animals. I would not put animals' welfare above my comfort, right? And so I really had to work to understand her perspective and value it. You know, and I have been in trouble so many times for how many shelter bed days she has used because her name comes up on a list, and why is this person and what have you not done? Well, we are working.
Right.
We are working together. She is living where she wants to live.
Right.
And she's safe, and she's not getting arrested, and she's not stealing pipes out of anyone's home, and she's not doing drugs. And you know, there's like a lot of Medicaid dollars being saved. So there are bottom lines that can support allowing people to live in the way that they would like to live through the time that I have known you. So I think I came on the board in 2004, maybe 2017 is when I came on the board. And so for 8 years now, you have been talking about non-shelter alternatives for people who just do not want to live inside.
Right.
And transitional tiny home sleeping arrangements.
Right.
And I did see in the news that there's a tiny home village that just opened in Columbus. But those are individual, discrete tiny homes that have the square footage with some community features. And you're talking about developing a tiny village with a communal focus.
Right. So, you know, I have my ideas on what this might look like, but I want to be very clear that this is just one perspective. As this manifests itself, you know, these ideas, I'm very open to change, because I've done a lot of research into tiny villages throughout the country, and they all have different approaches. Some are akin to, you know, what my visual is, which is a small conditioned living space, say around 10 foot by 10 foot, that a person could have a bed, a small sitting area, possibly a dorm style refrigerator and a microwave, where they could just, if they wanted to get away from the world, they could. They have their stuff secured so they don't have to worry about theft. And then have a common area for bathing and cooking and such like that. But as you are identifying, and I'm not as familiar with the particulars about Vista Village, although I will be looking into it since it's right down the road from us. You know, some people have mini houses. They're not even what I would call tiny houses. Detroit, I think they have square footage of 400 and above, and are fully functional apartments. They're houses, but they're fully functional, meaning they have their own kitchen, bath, that sort of thing. So they don't have a common area that people would gather at or utilize for different things. Some people have their tiny house villages sober living. That's a requirement for them. Occupy Madison fits in that realm. Other people, I can't think of the name of it now. It's out on the West Coast. I think it's Portland. They're just like, you know, show up as you are. You know, there's not a requirement of sobriety, for example. and some some have are run by a staff, are more empowering of the people living there to be responsible to the community for everything like trash pickup to security to maintenance, that sort of thing. So everybody has slightly different approaches to the idea of tiny house villages. So that's why I say I'm flexible. I think what has to happen in a situation like this, when it gains traction, is we have to have people that are living in in an unsheltered situation weigh in on what's important for them as a part of the decision making of what this shapes up to look like. I don't want to presume what's going to be best for a person that's living in an unsheltered situation. Let them, this is about empowering people. This is part of the relationship building that we're talking about, is giving people a choice in how they're going to live their lives. Excuse me. And so what my vision is really secondary. The main, as far as the specifics, the main idea though is to create an alternative for people besides either going to the shelters or going to or staying outside in a tent. I would envision, again, this is subject to feedback, but I would envision that what we would do as a tiny house village would replace a radical hospitality, a metanoia, that sort of thing. Not to say that, we would, I would see us having staff, having personnel there as part of the relationship building, as part of the operations, but I could see this village being a permanent thing, and something that, as I said, just, is a tool in the road to recovery or road to change for people in their lives. Again, relationship building, giving people, ability to make decisions over their well-being, what's best for them. These are all ways for people to reclaim their lives.
So thinking about for people who have not experienced someplace like metanoia or radical hospitality, the basic premise is that when the deal that was struck in Cleveland is when it's below 22 degrees during the week, and also during the shelter season, which is like November to March, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you have open, like, churches, gymnasiums, storefronts that will say, yes, you can come use our site. One of the issues we've had is finding a permanent location. We've had many locations. We've had churches that have hosted us for short term or long term. And so what are some of the things that make it difficult for community partners with space to want to be a part of a hospitality, to host radical hospitality?
Well, let me just mention one thing before I answer your question. We look to operate 7 days a week.
Yeah, because that's what people want when we ask them what they want.
Right.
And I've done the community surveys, and they said, why can't we be open 7 days a week?
Right. And, our effort is to be open year round. But, what are the barriers to people wanting to participate? I think it's very of no's from churches. And, you think that's, incongruous with how they should be
Well, it's
looking at
incongruous
their
with
mission.
their statements, their missions, the story.
Right.
Many Christmas and Easter Christians are hearing 50% of the services they go to, they're hearing the story of no room at the inn.
Right.
And their Lord and Savior being born in a stable.
Right.
So it's very confusing.
Yes, it is.
So,
and I can't say I can reconcile that, but I think that comes down to fear, and I'm not going to say some of it's not warranted. Of course, you've got the unknown, you've got, what could potentially happen to our space if we make it available under these circumstances. Definitely a strong factor is the whole not in my backyard factor, that neighbors just don't want to have people that are homeless congregating around them and such. And
smoking
again,
in church parking lots really sets neighbors off.
And I don't want to make it, I don't want to make it sound like I'm tone deaf or dismissing these concerns. They're valid concerns in many respects. And if and when we have that opportunity to find a willing partner, I would be very strong in wanting to reach out to the community to involve them, even if it's nothing more than just involve in some of the decision making, much less the ongoing operations. I'd really like to see people be involved in the ongoing operations. But as our friend, dear friend George Herbeck brought up when we were talking about the youth drop-in over at Franklin, when he was involved with St. Herman's, and St. Herman's, creating a facility for the homeless right in the middle of a residential community. There was, of course, a lot of pushback, and what evolved from this pushback was several of the neighbors in the community were invited to be part of the strategy sessions, the planning on how this could look, so they would have a say in things that were making them uncomfortable with having a place for people that are homeless as part of their community. So this would be the approach I think would need to be taken. But yeah, it's both. At least what I see is the community of the facility that you're asking about being nervous as far as who are we opening our doors to, plus the community at large saying, hey, I want peace and quiet on my street.
Yeah. And one of the, we were at Malachi, one of the barriers to 7 days a week, they said, we can give you these days, but if it's this day, we can't because we have all these other programs. And what programs are running that are in conflict to having people stay overnight?
Well, like what Malachi would bring up and would be things like after school programs, AA meetings, things that they have scheduled that would be occupying the space that we would also want to occupy. Like Malachi had AA meetings that would be held in the cafeteria, which was the main portion of the school that we would operate out of. And so one night a week they would have their meetings there. And so that was something that we had to overcome. We eventually worked through these issues and such, but that's Pilgrim Church had basketball, youth basketball. So, and then I'm trying to think what some of the other ones were, but basically that just, hey, we are giving back to the community in this way, not the way you're asking us to, but we're doing it here, and we don't want to disrupt that program. So that's can lead to some of these stumbling blocks that we incur.
Yeah. What about new sites? What's the problem with developing a site that is currently a brownout or a blacked out storefront?
I'm not opposed to that at all. There are several storefronts. If you go down Lorraine Avenue, you can see that are vacant, and, throughout the community at large.
So what would be the city's problem with that?
City's problem, city's problem mostly centers around safety. So, they get concerned. They look at us like we're a hotel. So we have, I'm not sure if it's an R4 or an R1 designation, but when they, approve a hotel, their philosophy is you're going to have people sleeping here that are not familiar with their surroundings. So if in the middle of the night, a fire breaks out, we need to be able to get these people out. It's not like living in your home where you know where the stairs are or where the front door is. You're in a hotel and it's like, where are the exits? So they look at that and say, okay, we have to have clearly defined exits that can be seen, in a fire. We have to have alarm systems that are giving people early warning. Usually, well, not usually, always sprinkler systems to suppress fire. So all of these components go into how you're evacuating the Hilton downtown if there were a major fire.
Right.
And so they treat us like that because they say, well, you've got 30 people or so. Hell, in Metanoia, we had 105 people. You've got these many people here, and they just aren't as familiar with their surroundings. I would argue that, but you understand where they're thinking, and they're saying you've got to have a clear way to get people out. So that's the city's problem with especially larger spaces. Now, when we were dealing with the whole wanting to expand our operation to Denison UCC, and the fire department was involved in that. And during one of the meetings that we had with the fire department, I asked one of the officers, I said, is it possible that if we had a smaller space that we would have less criterion in which to meet in order to operate in the city's eyes safely? And he said, absolutely. If you were in a Catholic worker storefront, you don't necessarily need all of this because it's a storefront. It's right on the first floor, easy exit, windows that, bring light into the place so can help illuminate your means of getting out. So they do view smaller capacity spaces less stringently. But that's the roadblocks. Now, I mentioned about the worker storefront before we started this, and the pushback we got, because we did get approved to operate out of the storefront this season, but one of the pushbacks involved around the fact that that space is designated as having apartments. And while the apartments aren't occupied, one is as an office only during the day, and the other's not, they still see apartments, and they saw that as a problem, that, that people that are staying on the first floor could potentially cause a fire hazard, for example, that might affect the people on the second floor. So that was what they, and they didn't spell it all out, but that's what I was viewing as the problematic part of a reason for them not wanting to. They didn't say they wouldn't approve the space, but I got a strong suspicion that if they managed to go along with what we wanted to do there, by the time it finally got through an approval process, it would be after the season's over anyhow. And plus, we didn't want to do anything that would jeopardize the current activities that are going on at the storefront. We didn't want to shine a light on them and have them scrutinized for any reason. So we just bowed out. But, so there are, informally, I've been made aware that there are less stringent requirements that we could meet. Again, in your question about operating out of a storefront, but we haven't pursued that yet. We're still, and that will be something that we would explore moving forward. The other thing you all also have to be aware of in a situation like that is generally you're dealing with a property owner, and what is that property owner's tolerance for an activity like ours? They want to rent it to, a retail space where there's no muss, no fuss, so they don't, they're not looking for programs like ours to be part of what they're trying to do, which is money off their property.
Right. The brownfield development grants specify that you're developing it into something that will generate tax revenue and will generate income. So anytime you're trying to use it to develop a nonprofit, I think that's probably a no-go.
Yeah, definitely. I wasn't familiar with their requirements, but yeah, I would say that would be the case. We're not looking to operate out of any place as a freebie. We do and have always paid rent, but it's definitely, it's to churches usually, and they're not necessarily going to rent it out to someone 30 days a month kind of thing, and they're not as worried about getting revenue. But if it was a private property owner, then they're going to want to maximize their revenue, and again, be in a situation where they're not having to deal with the headaches, potential headaches of what a shelter might bring. So
the wheels in my head are spinning. I have many ideas about this. I'd like you to talk about the stand down, because I think there's probably a lot of my students who won't know what that is.
Okay, the stand down is still in existence. I haven't been to one in a few years. In fact, it would be right around this time of year. They usually do it in the winter time, and it used to be, most recently, it used to be at a public auditorium. And what the stand down is it's a variety of things. It provides people with a meal. It provides them with clothing. Everything that I've seen them offer as far as clothing at the stand down were new items, not repurposed items. But it's also a way, and I think this would be under the headline of relationship building, where they want to pamper people for a day. People, very rarely, get to experience that in their lives in general, especially people that are homeless or in a poverty situation. Stand down was not strictly for people that were homeless, but when I've been involved, they've offered things like chair massages. They've offered legal counseling, pro bono. They haircuts for people. They have, one of the times I was there, they were offering family portraits, and medical screening, and so it's just and then there of course was music while people would sit around and eat. So it's just a little way for people to temporarily drop their shoulders, and again get a little spoiled. At least that's how I interpreted what they were doing. And then there would be plenty of organizations with their literature that they could hand out to people. They would be at booths, and they could talk to people as well, get to know them, and see if they can help them out in any different ways. So that in general has been what the stand down has been all about.
I think that the stand down did a wonderful thing in creating a volunteer opportunity for Supervolunteer Paul Sherlock, right? They snagged you. It was like
Right.
You were like a fish on a hook,
Right.
Into this population. And that's really what we hope for. We want to create that anytime we have an event.
Right.
Right. So if you are working with folks and you want to organize an event, there's a component in it that we want people to feel involved and engaged.
Right.
So I've been to some fun events that you have put together. Can you talk about the musical event?
Musical event that at the stand down, or just in general?
You had someone come in and perform, and I think there must have been 50 people there.
Yeah, that was at the church, and I think you're talking about the church in Westlake. I can't.
It was a benefit concert.
Right. Yeah, that was an interesting one. That was I have to give most of the credit to Dana Manning. She was she attended that church, and then there were various people from Metanoia that were also pretty heavily involved in the organization. But yeah, we had a performer from out of town. We're still Facebook friends. Come in, and there was, in fact, I think there was drawing, painting there, if I'm not mistaken. But there was definitely this gentleman coming in and performing.
I have art up in my office that I have from that benefit.
Okay.
So there was some maybe a silent auction or a raffle.
Yeah, right. So we've done that. Again, remembering all the details about that particular event, but we've done that where we've had silent auctions before and stuff. It was just again, community people that are, finding, uh, ready to step up and, in their way, address the needs of what we were doing. We always, as you know, every organization always needs money because we're usually walking with our hat in hand, trying to raise money for our different causes. So that was mostly as a fundraiser for folks that just to help support our cause. So I'm always about music, and that was definitely a good opportunity to um, bring people together on that basis, on the basis of common enjoyment of music as well. Um, the performer, I remember he went by the nickname Cornflower, and he had a certain uh, uh, group of people in this community that knew of him, so there was a built-in audience, so to speak, for him. So that made things easier as well, instead of just someone that I didn't know him, but as I said, some people did know him, so it was an opportunity for them to see him perform because he's not from around here, and support the cause. So, I'm always about creating events like that on much smaller scales. We've had house concerts right here.
I've been to a house concert.
And, they would be any money that was raised in a benefit manner would be for, well, if it was for metanoia or radical hospitality. A lot of times we would have benefits where someone was in need, so we would raise money on their behalf. Maybe it was a medical issue, what have you. But we've had house concerts here for those kind of purposes, especially for the purpose of raising money for the organization.
Have you seen any federal changes in 2025 that are impacting your community?
Federal, I haven't seen yet. That's going to come down the pike. I think there will be a delay in some of the, depending on what cuts the Trump administration applies. Yes, we undoubtedly could be affected by that. Probably will be so, I'd have to say. But I'm not seeing it yet. I think the resistance that we're having, maybe the resistance we're having on a county level is with an eye toward, this, at the time it was prior to Trump coming into office, maybe knowing what he did this first 4 years, that they were anticipating that there were going to be cuts. I'm not sure, but definitely on a county level, we're seeing more pushback from county council members. Don't know about the executive, Ronayne, and his, if he's crying poor mouth necessarily. I don't want to put thoughts or words about him in anybody's head, but I've gotten pushback from county council where they feel like they've done their part by investing in the shelters, and that they feel that we need to get back to raising our own money independent of government money. And I can appreciate their sentiment. I'm sure they get a lot of people knocking on their doors, but I feel like housing is pretty fundamental. And if a person's not ready for housing, at least shelter is pretty fundamental.
Yeah, and transitional housing programs.
Right.
Transitional housing programs are largely gone, and
Right.
they have been cut over the last 20 years.
Well, yeah, they're we're in a perpetual austerity mode. I mean, this is nothing new to, the least among us, that we are always, as I said before, with our hat in our hand, asking for alms. I mean, people that are homeless always have gotten the short end of the stick. People that just don't have much of a voice in government in general are not, they're not getting the services that are needed out there. And, our government, unfortunately, is, anymore, it's probably always been this way, but it's more blatant. They're there to serve the needs of the wealthy.
Yeah.
And so we're always having to, pound the podium to get them to pay attention to us, which is what I did last year when we were raising funds for Radical Hospitality. I have no problem with going into county council meetings and calling people out, and that's what, it gets tiring, but that's what seems to have to happen in order to get them to respond in any meaningful way.
Yeah. I don't know how you have all the hours you do. You do more than me, which is saying something. But I feel like your one of your superpowers is attendance.
Right.
You are this. You are the rock that Sisyphus is pushing uphill over and over again. Like, oh, we don't have any action. See you back tomorrow.
Right.
And you have a very serene calm about that process of just waking up and awakening the light again tomorrow.
Well, you just got to keep getting up and getting after it. I mean, there are plenty of times where I've gotten discouraged and you just want to just go crawl under the covers and not come out. But then, I'm not wired that way, that for very long I can, sit and say, okay, I've done everything I can. I'm not going to, I'm just going to quit.
Yeah, you're not ready to retire and sit under your own vine and fig tree.
I don't see that happening. I see some way of pushing back just to do better. There's a phrase that popped up that I popped up on Facebook, social media, not too long ago, and it was paraphrasing Ram Dass. It said, whether this is the beginning of the apocalypse or the dawn of a new age, the work remains the same, is to love one another and take care of each other. And, I look at it and say, I, as you may know, I've been involved in national organizations, meaning I protested the Dakota Access Pipeline when that was going into North Dakota, part of the climate movement, March for Climate Action, that marched across the United States to draw awareness to the climate change that's occurring. I've been involved in these, and I'll still be involved in various others, like what's happening in Gaza and such. But I look at it and say, I can affect change more readily on a local, individual level, and that's where I'm going to put my energies into. Most of my energies. I'll still speak out on national causes for sure. I'll still get involved as they come up, that if I see a need to. But there's people sleeping on the street corners in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so, I want to do what I can to make a little bit better, a little bit less suffering. I'm not going to say make it a better place or anything, but just to ease the suffering of folks. If I can in any way do that, that's what I'm going to do.
Amen, brother. We went an hour and 20. I like to go around an hour. I knew we would make it. I knew we would not run out of things to talk about in an hour. This is my good friend, Paul Sherlock. We've got links for Radical Hospitality and the neighborhood pet program in the description. Like, subscribe, and donate today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patti.